Welcome back to part 3 of our live training session here with our K24 swapped Civic Si. In this training module, we're going to take a look at getting our engine actually fire up and run using the base map we've created in the last 2 tutorials. And we're going to focus on dialing in our idle control, making sure the engine's able to crank, fire, and run and hold its own idle so we can move on to doing things like part throttle tuning and wide open throttle tuning as we go through our live training tutorials here. Without further wait, let's jump in so we can check this out. Welcome back to our live training session here with our K24 Swap Civic Si. This training module, we're going to get our engine to fire up and run on our Link system. We've built the base file, we've uploaded it, we've stored it to the Link. Now we're going to go and test out how well that base file has been configured. We are going to have to make a decent amount of changes here to the idle control, fuel, and spark timing within idle parameters. We want to make sure the engine can crank, fire, and run, and maintain and hold its own stable idle. In the next tutorial, we can explore driving off idle and doing the part throttle cruise tuning process, but for right now, this is the very first step. In this tutorial, we're also going to take a look at, towards the end of the tutorial, dialing in and checking our ignition sync. So making sure that the ignition timing, if we command 10 degrees from the Link, is actually going to be getting 10 degrees at the engine. We want to check what's known as our trigger offset. If we go right here to cam and crank, we can see that's going to be our value here, trigger offset. Now, normally, if this was a universal application, so it was a wire-in Link application, not a plug and play, and I was running a base file, let's just say a generic base file, I would actually crank over the engine with a timing light and disable the injectors and actually check this trigger offset before I even fire at the engine. Because we're on a plug and play application with a plug and play base map from Link, this trigger offset is going to be within probably 5 degrees of where it should be. So we're going to run with our trigger offset value here of 5. This will allow the engine to fire up and run, and making sure that we have a reasonably matched or synced ignition timing between our Link and our engine. Again, we're going to verify this with a timing light, and we'll discuss that process later in the training module. The very first thing we need to do here is get the engine to actually fire up and run. Now, a few things with this I want to talk about before we actually crank over the engine, start data logging, and allow the engine to come up to operating temperature. When we're talking about the fuel model and the airflow model within the Link here, we're going to be in the model mode, and that is going to be, if we jump into our fuel tab here, this table represents volumetric efficiency, cylinder filling. This represents the estimation of airflow coming into the engine. So we need to get these values right in order to have our airflow model expressed correctly so that we can tell the Link how much airflow is coming into the engine, or at least estimate the airflow coming into the engine. And we deliver the proper amount of fuel based on this airflow. We don't know how far these values are off. It's a solid starting point. The values that we imported from the import feature when we built this table out in the last tutorial, it's a good starting point, but it's probably not going to be 100% accurate. So what we're going to find here is that we need to adjust the values more than likely, and we need to wait to make any adjustments into this table until the engine is up to operating temperature. So this estimation of airflow coming from the values in our table here assumes 2 things. 1, steady state conditions, so we don't have the throttle moving around, we don't have rapid airflow bursts or changes. And 2, that the engine is up to operating temperature, at least 160 degrees and warmer. The engine's up to its normal operating temperature range, and we don't have to have any of the modifier tables, such as the warm-up enrichment or the post-start enrichment, adding fuel against the airflow model coming from here as the engine is cold coming into a warm condition. So we need to make sure that we can fire up the engine, allow it to actually warm up, and then we can look and expose this table directly and edit the values in here. Now, what we're going to do in this tutorial is use the closed loop fuel correction and watch what the closed loop compensation is doing to guide us in what changes we need to make either into the airflow table here, into the estimation of airflow, these percentage of VE values, or into our injector data, specifically the latency data that affects idle most greatly. We're going to either have an error if we're too rich or too lean from the desired target lambda. We're commanding 1.0 lambda at idle conditions. We can find that here in our target lambda table. If we're not hitting that, let's say we're too rich or too lean, that means that we either have overestimated or underestimated VE values here, or our injector data is incorrect. So we have something that's creating an error in our air and fuel model. And that's a pretty straightforward modeling. It's going to be fuel mass is equal to air mass divided by target air fuel. Our air mass calculation comes from the table here, along with other hard fixed parameters such as number of cylinders, engine displacement, things of that nature. That gives us air mass. The target air fuel comes from our target lambda value here. And then knowing air mass, dividing it by target lambda, target air fuel, gives us a fuel mass. we can convert the fuel mass into an injector pulse width based on knowing the volume flow of the injector size that we're dealing with, as well as the density of the fuel that we're dealing with. And we've supplied that information to the link. So it's going to do the conversion of fuel mass into an injector pulse width and deliver that exact pulse width to the injector. And we should find, if everything was perfectly dialed in here, that we get that exact amount of fuel needed to hit the desired lambda. If we don't, that means that we have an error on the airflow model side, or we have an error on the fuel modeling side. The injector data is bad. So either the VE values are bad or the injector data is bad. We'll figure out exactly which side of that error lies to correct, so which one we need to actually go after as we get the engine to fire up and run. I'll explain that a little bit more, but we will be using the closed loop correction in exposing how much of an error we're finding. The closed loop correction looks at the desired lambda, it looks at the actual lambda, it figures out how far they're off or separated from each other. It makes a percentage of adjustment to the injector pulse width, and then it corrects the air fuel, the lambda, so that we hit the actual target that we're going after. So it's going to tell us if it's off 10%, 20%, it's going to show us, and then we know, okay, we have a 20%.
Thanks for checking out our teaser clip. If you want to see the rest of this video and more than 500 hours of current EFI training we have to offer, make sure you click right here. If you want to go and check out more teaser clips from this training course, click here, and you don't want to miss any of the videos we're going to be releasing on this channel, so make sure you subscribe and click here. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.